Thanks for attending today's webinar. Today we'll be focused on creating a simple workflow within CRM. So we'll focus more on how workflows work and just create a really simple one that will actually email your client confirmation a new employee's been added, and also copy some people internally on this email. And then we will add more workflows in later videos that will kind of build upon these skills. So to start with, I will start with just basically logging into CRM. So it's going to add my little favorite shortcut on my desktop here, and I've already got my user ID and password in, so I've logged right into CRM, starting my home page right here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to maneuver to where you actually create workflows. And to do that, use the try bar, the big hamburger right here, and go to the settings panel. Once you're in the settings area, there's an area called processes. The process center of processes, if you really kind of replace the word workflow with processes, that should be good for now. All the other types of processes we won't use, so we're just going to be using workflows. So just go ahead and click on processes right there, and you will get a view, whatever your default view of processes. Right now, these are my processes, so these are processes I own. But we're creating one from scratch in this case. So to create a new workflow, you click the New button, always in the upper left-hand corner, kind of like if you're creating a new email in Outlook. But if you click the New button, it opens up basically an area for you to name your new workflow. So we will name this New Employee Alert Confirmation to Client. You can name it whatever you want. The category for now, for anything that we do, is always going to be workflow. So just ignore the other ones for now. Then the entity is simply, what are we working with? What table of data are we working with in the system? So we're talking about a new employee alert, so pretty obviously, if we scroll down past the EEs all the way down to employee. An employee is a ThinkWare created custom entity that matches the employees that you have in Darwin. So if you add an employee in Darwin, or a new employee is added to the onboarding module in Darwinet, that's what's actually going to kick off this workflow. So if I click on employee and I click OK, it takes me to my invoice worksheet. This describes when the workflow is going to run and what it's going to do. So we'll kind of walk through what all these fields mean as we go through this. So first thing, available to run this in the background. Just leave that as is for now. That just means it'll run in a queue, basically based upon other workflows that are running. If we uncheck this, it basically tries to run this workflow immediately. But that's really not necessary except for some special circumstances. So this is the best choice to have. The second choice is an on-demand process. So while normally we want this workflow to run in the background, somebody adds an employee in Darwin, an employee gets onboarded through Darwinet, whatever it is, we also, whenever I do a new workflow, I always check this off, because I can also kick off this workflow manually by pressing a button. And that way I actually don't have to go in and add an employee to go ahead and test this workflow. So I always recommend checking that off until you have the workflow running the way that you want to. As a child process just simply means one workflow can call another workflow. Don't need to worry about that in this kind of simple example. Down here it says automatically delete completed workflow jobs to save disk space. What this means is every time a workflow runs, it takes a copy of what happened and stores it against that record so we can see what happens. It's great for error checking. If the workflows run millions of times, then yeah, you probably want to leave this checked off. But you can come back and check it on later. When I'm first doing a workflow, I uncheck it so I can see what happened. In a simple workflow, it's really not necessary, but if you have a 10-step complex workflow and it's not doing what you expected, this really helps. So I usually say uncheck this when you're first creating the workflow. Then moving to the right here, this is what we're running against. We'll talk about that again in a second. But our next choice is scope. So I really yet to find a business use other than organization. So for purposes of today, I'm always going to tell you, always change this to organization. If you have a workflow that's not working and you can't figure out why, make this your first error check. Did you change this to organization? So before you check anything else, just make sure that says organization when you're kind of error checking your workflows. Now here's kind of where the cool stuff starts. So to start when. So this is basically saying, what needs to kick off the workflow that we're running. Kind of the two most common ones are record is created and record fields change. And those really leverage our integration with Darwin and Darwinet. So basically, if I leave this, start when, just kind of logically think of what it's saying. Record is created. So that's a new one of whatever is here. So if there is a new employee, we're going to start this workflow, whatever we decide to do down here. So that's what we'll leave for now. What these other ones mean, record status changes means it's more for CRM and activations, very rarely used. I tell you to ignore it. Record is assigned means ownership changes. That's more used, I'd say, like on the sales side, most commonly, or a service case being changed from one representative to another representative. We can have an alert go out. So it has value, but we'll tackle that in some other workflows. Record fields change. This is a very valuable one. Basically, if I check this box off and click select, this will list, basically, if you think about it, we're looking at an employee here, an employee that's in Darwin. So these are all the Darwin employee fields. So if any of these fields change, we can have a workflow kick off. For example, a common one we might do later is work status. The work status change of the employee from full-time to part-time or part-time to full-time, we want to let the benefits department know or something like that. In this case, we're not going to use that because right now we're just saying if there's a new employee, let's go ahead and kick off an email. That's all we really want to do. So very simple workflow. So then once we have decided when the workflow is going to run, now we decide what it's going to do. So if I click the add step down here, we'll get a bunch of different choices. And we'll go over all these other choices in other videos. But right now, we're doing something pretty simple, kind of the gold standard, which is send an email, send a notification to somebody. So if I click send email here, now I'm getting a step. So my step is contained right here. If I want to choose the step, I can click that little gray dot here. It becomes blue. It's where my focus is. If I wanted to insert a step beforehand or after. But right now, this is a simple one-step workflow. When this record is created, which is the employee record, we're going to send an email. So the type of description is just something in English verbally, or written down that if somebody else was looking at this workflow, we can know why they did this step. And really all this is send client and email confirmation of a new employee. So it doesn't matter what you type in there, it's really just for somebody else to know why you did this. So we click the send, we see the send email here, and we just simply click the set properties. And then now we're just building our email. And this email will be kind of what I call a combination of static values, just things you type, words you type, just like you were typing an email to somebody in your office, and dynamic values. Dynamic values means grabbing from CRM and putting values into the email. So for example, the from does need to be a user in the system. So I'll just use my kind of demonstration user here, but to look up a user, generally I say at the beginning, don't just type in these boxes, do lookups, because if you look up something, then it'll know to go ahead and track that email against that record. So we're going to say it's going to be from a user. I'll just use this kind of fake user I have here, CRM Tom. And now I'm going to send it to somebody. So the from is going to be static in this case. It's always going to be from the CRM Tom user. The to is going to go to, in this case I said, hey, let's send this to a client or something like that. So if I go over here, I can see what things I can send it to. So if I see, right now it's saying, okay, well, there's the employee. That's the record we're working with. But if I look at the things that are related to the employee, I notice the first thing there is something called the account parenthesis client, and that's the actual client record. So I can send this to whatever the primary email address is for that client right there. And I just simply click add, make sure my focus is okay here with the mouse, and okay. Now it's going to send it from CRM Tom to that client, as long as there's an email address, of course, for that client. Now I can copy other people too. So I can copy other users internally. But even if I don't have, even if somebody in my office that I want to copy or somebody external, they weren't a user, it's okay. I can copy contact records. So for example, if I'm saying I want to copy the payroll department or somebody like that, I can come in and look up contact records. So let's go ahead and say, what contacts do I have? So if I come in here and I need to search for somebody, do I have anybody called payroll? Yep, there's my payroll contact and there's their email address. I could also create it on the fly if I don't have it. But you want to send this to a record type, like in this case contact, because it will track the fact that email was sent to the payroll contact. So I'll just go ahead and say, okay, that's my internal team or whatever it is that gets that actual email. And I can blind copy just like anybody else. So it's going to be from Tom statically to the payroll teams statically email, and then dynamically whatever client this new employee is working for. Then here's the subject. So it's just, if you think about it, just like you would type an email, whatever subject we want them to get every time we, every time we add an employee or an employee's being confirmed, new employee confirmed, and then maybe a little bit of separator. And I'm actually going to go back over here, choose my entity right here, which is the employee record. So that's the employee record. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want to put the employee name in here. Now, just as an FYI, I could grab, first name and last name if I want to. There's first name and last name. But I happen to know there's a record called employee, and there's a field just generically called employee. That's actually going to contain the employee name. So we can just use that. If you forget that, using first name and last name is just fine. So you choose that, you click add, and then make sure your mouse is in the right spot, and then you click OK. And then I can add other fields if I wanted to, right in the subject. So if I want them to know other things about this right in the subject, maybe I want them to know, something like start date. I'll put that in there. Now, whenever you're adding more dynamic fields, make sure you clear out the last field before you add a new one. So just this little box right here, just make sure you X that back out. And now I can go grab other fields. So I'll come in and grab start date. Let's go find it. RS, and there's start date. Let's click add. Once again, make sure your mouse is where you want the new field, and OK. And then building the body of the email is exactly the same as the subject. Hello, this alert is to confirm a new employee. And then we can put a bunch of data here. So this is maybe, in this case, I want to type in something like first name. And then once again, it's just a matter of now just routinely finding all the different fields you want to put in. So I'm going to split first name and last name this time. First name, add. Once again, make sure the mouse is in the right spot, and there it is. Then, other fields like last name. And then I'll clear out the first name field, then go find the last name field. Click add, and OK. And then correct my error right there. And then anything else that we wanted about the employee. So I'll just choose one more field. So if you think of the Darwin employee maintenance screen, if you guys are familiar with that, but basically everything about the employee we can actually add to this. So maybe we'll just go ahead and add a phone number. Phone number. And I'll also grab employee ID too. So let's find phone number, phone 1, there, and then we'll just put in the employee ID. Employee ID. Oops. For our last field, the employee ID, grab that field. So this took me a couple minutes to do, but realize you do this once, and this email will go every time. And of course, later on, this might be over emailing somebody internally, so most likely we would never email somebody internally. So I want to show you that as an example. But we can do conditions where only send it to certain clients, certain criteria, certain types of employees, lots of different things you can do for those types of things. Right now, I just want to show you kind of a basic idea. If there's a new record in the system, either in Darwin or CRM, we can do something like sending an email. And then, thanks, your HR team. And if you wanted any attachments attached to the email, you can do it right down here. Just grab the attachment, and that attachment will be attached to every email. So, some sort of generic form about welcome to the PEO or whatever it might be that you need to send out. So once this is done, once I've built this actual email right here, I just simply save and close and click activate. And once I've clicked activate, I'm done. I've actually created this workflow. So now if I actually added an employee, got finalized through our onboarding, or we actually just manually typed in an employee in the back office, this workflow will run. Now it's gonna, if you remember, I said choose as an on-demand process right here. That's so we can go ahead and test this workflow without actually having to go ahead and add the employee. There's actually nothing else we need to do. We're done. But I like to test these things so I can watch it run. So this next part is just what you do when you first create a workflow, just so you can see what actually happens. So what I want to do is I want to run this against an employee. Now, it doesn't really matter what employee I run it against. In real world, you want to make sure when you're testing these things, realize that if I test this right now, that client's going to get an email. So just kind of keep that in consideration. Lots of times what we'll do is say, for the first time when you first create the workflow, have all the emails go internally until you're ready to expose them to the outside world. So by the way, I've just searched for an employee. I knew I had an employee named James Winton, so I used my global search for that employee. Here's James Winton right here. Now the cool thing is I have this button here called Run Workflow. Now it lets me test this workflow. So if I click the Run Workflow button, it'll list any workflows that are allowed to be run on demand. And I have a bunch of them in kind of my demo environment. So I know I just created this one a minute ago. So if I sort by created on, there it is. There's that new employee alert confirmation, that confirmation to client right there. Created on 6/5/2018 when I'm recording this. So if I double click this workflow, it'll say, okay, do you really want to run this? Sure. So now that workflow is running. And it usually takes workflows, depending on how complex they are, anywhere between 10 seconds and maybe a minute to run. But I want to make sure this is running okay. If you remember, I said, let's store the history so I can see what actually happens. So if I go back up here to James Winton, click this little down arrow, there's a background processes section right here. So if I click on that, that's going to show me my workflows that I've run for James. There it is. So the workflow ran, it succeeded, so that's good. It finished within a minute or so. And if I actually want to see what happened, if I double click that line, this is the history of that workflow running. So it said, okay, create new message, send this email out to whomever right there. And this is the actual email right here, stored against this email will actually be stored against that record. And here's the email that's going to be sent out to James Winton, wherever that email address is going to go. So that's the end result. And this email will actually be stored against that record forever. So I can go ahead and see James Winton's emails. I'll be able to see a list of any emails that he's been sent, and that email is done. It'll be sent out to the client, to the internal department, the internal payroll department, so they know what's going on. Well, anyways, that's the concept behind creating a simple workflow. We'll have more workflow videos later.